She had built $1 billion empire with her own hands, and tonight that empire sent men with guns to silence her forever. Elena Whitmore, 30 years old, the most powerful CEO in the industry, is racing through a mountain storm with no signal, no backup, and nowhere left to run. 3 black SUVs are closing in. The people hunting her aren't criminals from the outside. They're the ones who sat across from her at the boardroom table every single morning. If you want to know how one woman and one forgotten soldier brought down a conspiracy that nearly swallowed everything, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and stay until the very last word. The rain started somewhere around mile 47, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives all at once, like a decision already made. Elena Whitmore had been driving for 2 hours with both hands on the wheel and her phone propped against the dashboard, the screen glowing pale blue in the dark. The message she'd received at 9:47 that evening had been 11 words long. She had read it 4 times before she stopped counting. They're moving the money tonight. Everything you signed, you didn't sign it. The sender was Marcus Reed, the company's internal auditor. He had been unreachable for 6 days. HR listed him as on personal leave. His desk had already been cleared. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. That had been instinct more than strategy. A low, cold feeling in her chest that told her not to trust the people she normally trusted. So she'd left her apartment without her security detail, taken her personal car instead of the company vehicle, and driven north on Route 9 toward the mountain property where Marcus had said the original documents were kept. Now the rain was coming sideways, and the road had narrowed to a single lane, and Elena realized, with the kind of clarity that only arrives too late, that she might have made a serious mistake. Her phone lost signal at mile 53. She noticed the first SUV at mile 56, black, no plates visible in the rain, staying exactly 4 car lengths behind her. She told herself it was nothing. A coincidence. People drove in the mountains. People drove at night. By mile 59, there were 3 of them. "Okay," she said aloud, to no one. Her voice sounded strange in the car. Too small. "Okay." She pushed the accelerator down and the road curved hard to the left, and she took it too fast, felt the rear tires slip on the wet asphalt, corrected, kept moving. The SUVs didn't close the gap, but they didn't fall back either. They just maintained it. Precise, patient, like they already knew how this ended. She tried her phone again. No signal. She tried the car's built-in navigation system and got a loading screen that froze and didn't move. She had a vague memory of seeing a gas station somewhere back around mile 40, one of those places so old and weathered it looked like a photograph of itself, and she thought, if she could get back there, if she could get off this road before they boxed her in. The SUV on her left came out of nowhere. It must have looped around on a service road she hadn't seen, because suddenly it was beside her rather than behind, and it was bigger than she'd realized, and it was moving closer. She swerved right. The gravel shoulder crumbled under her tires, and she felt the car drop. Not fall, just drop 6 inches, as the right wheels hit the drainage gully running alongside the road. She yanked the wheel left, and the car fishtailed and stalled. For 3 seconds, she sat there in the dark, engine dead, rain hammering the roof. Then she grabbed her phone and her bag and got out of the car and ran. She didn't know the terrain. She didn't have a flashlight. She was wearing low heels that she'd had on since a 7 a.m. investor call, and the mud was already over her ankles. She ran anyway, cutting through a stand of pines, half sliding down a shallow embankment, and came out on a gravel road she didn't recognize. Behind her, she could hear car doors, voices, the sweep of flashlight beams cutting through the rain. The gas station appeared in front of her like something that had been waiting. It was barely a structure anymore. 2 old pump islands, the kind with rounded tops that hadn't been manufactured since the 80s, stood in front of a low concrete building with a faded red stripe running across the fascia. The windows were dark. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Mercer's Service." The letters almost washed out. A truck sat to one side of the building under a corrugated metal overhang. Old, heavy, looked like it actually ran. Elena pushed through the front door. The interior smelled like motor oil and sawdust and something faintly metallic. There was a front counter with a cracked glass top, a faded map of the county tacked to the wall, and a single lamp with a low-watt bulb casting more shadow than light. Tools hung on pegboards along the back wall. A child's drawing was taped crookedly above the register. A house, a stick figure man, a smaller stick figure, the words "Me and Daddy" written in careful crayon letters. Elena stood in the middle of the room and tried to catch her breath and failed. She heard a sound behind her. She spun. There was a man standing in the doorway that led to the back, tall, wide through the shoulders, wearing a canvas work jacket over a dark flannel shirt. He was maybe 32, with close-cropped dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong once and healed on its own. His eyes were doing something she recognized later as assessment, moving over her in about 2 seconds, covering the door she'd come through, the windows, the floor, back to her face. He had a wrench in his right hand. He looked at it, then set it down on the counter without making a sound. "You're bleeding," he said. She touched her face. Her hand came away with a thin smear of red. She'd caught a branch somewhere in the trees and hadn't felt it. "There are men outside," she said. "They were chasing me. My car went off the road." "How many?" "3 vehicles. At least 6 people. Maybe more." He didn't react to that the way she expected. He didn't look scared. He didn't reach for a phone. He just nodded once, very slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Back room," he said. "Now." "I don't know you." "That's fine." He moved to the front window and looked out through the gap between the board and the frame, not touching the glass. "You've got about 90 seconds before those lights reach the parking lot. You can stand here and finish introducing yourself, or you can go through that door and be quiet." Elena went through the door. The back room was a workshop. Engine parts on metal shelving, a hydraulic lift that wasn't currently in use, a workbench covered in tools arranged with a neatness that didn't match the general chaos of the space. There was a trap door in the floor, heavy wood with a recessed iron handle, and the man, he hadn't told her his name yet, hadn't told her anything, lifted it like it weighed nothing and pointed down. She stared at him. "You want me to go into a hole in the ground. I want you to stay alive." He wasn't being cold about it. He was just being accurate. "There's a room down there. My grandfather used it for storage. It's dry, it's clean, and it doesn't have windows." He looked at her shoes, the ruined heels, the mud, and for a half-second she thought she saw something pass across his face, not quite pity, something more complicated. "Steps on the left side." She went down. He lowered the trapdoor over her and she heard his footsteps move away across the floor above, and then she was alone in the dark, with the sound of her own breathing. 30 seconds later, the flashlight beams swept the windows. She heard everything from below. The front door opening. She'd thought he'd lock it, but apparently he hadn't. Heavy footsteps on concrete. A voice she recognized, and that recognition was the moment when the night stopped being frightening and became something worse. "Logan?" The voice belonged to Richard Hale, head of corporate security at Whitmore Solutions. Her corporate security. A man she'd known for 4 years. A man who stood outside her office door during quarterly earnings calls. A man who had once driven her to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when she had appendicitis and insisted she take the elevator instead of the stairs even after she was cleared to walk. "Mr. Hale." The man above her, Logan, kept his voice flat, unimpressed. "We're looking for a woman, 30s, dark hair, professional clothes. She may have come through this area in the last 15 minutes. Nobody's come through here. This road doesn't go anywhere else." "That's the road's problem, not mine. I've been working on a rebuild all night." A brief pause. She imagined him gesturing at something, the engine on the bench, probably. "You're welcome to look around." Another pause, longer. "How's your daughter?" Elena went very still. "She's fine," Logan said. His voice had changed. Not obvious. She doubted most people would have caught it, but the evenness went out of it, just barely, just for a word. "She's asleep." "Good to hear it." Hale's footsteps crossed the floor, slow, deliberate. "You know, Logan, we've been trying to reach you about the property situation. There are some real opportunities here if you just come to the table. I know what your opportunities look like. Silence. Look around if you need to, Logan said. Then get off my property. She heard them move through the workshop. She heard someone step directly over the trapdoor. She stopped breathing. The footsteps moved on. 5 minutes later, the vehicles left. What? Logan opened the trapdoor and reached a hand down, and Elena took it, because her legs had gone shaky, in a way she hadn't felt since she was 19, and had a car accident on the interstate and sat on the shoulder for 40 minutes before anyone stopped. She came up into the dim light of the workshop, and he looked at her the way a person looks at someone when they're deciding whether to say the thing they're thinking. He said it. That was Richard Hale. Yes. He runs security for a company called Whitmore Solutions. I know because his people have been sending me paperwork about this property for the last 4 months. He leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms. Not aggressive. She got the impression it was just how he stood when he was thinking. You want to tell me who you are? She did. She told him her name and watched his face register it, the slight widening of the eyes, the quick internal recalibration, and then watched him pull that reaction back and put a more neutral expression in its place, the way someone does when they've learned not to show too much. Elena Whitmore, he said. Yes. CEO of the company whose people just searched my garage. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain was still coming down. A clock on the wall, an old analog one, the kind with a sweep second hand, ticked through 10 full seconds. My name is Logan Mercer, he said finally. This is my family's property. He nodded toward the door. I've got a 7-year-old sleeping in the house out back, so I need to keep my voice down. You want coffee? You look like you need something. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, too high, and she pressed her hand over her mouth. Coffee would be... Yes. Yes, please. They sat at the counter in the front room with 2 mugs of coffee that Logan made in a machine held together with electrical tape, and Elena told him everything from the beginning. She told him about Marcus Reed's message, about the missing documents, about the drive up Route 9. She told him about the 3 SUVs and her car in the ditch, and running through the woods in heels that cost $400 and were now completely destroyed. Logan listened without interrupting. She noticed that he watched the windows while she talked, not nervously, just consistently, the way someone does when watching windows is a habit too old to break. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Marcus Reed, he said, internal auditor. He's been missing for 6 days. Missing or disappeared? The question landed differently than she expected. What do you mean? I mean, did he choose to disappear or was he helped? She hadn't let herself think about that. She thought about it now, and it sat in her stomach like something cold. I don't know. Logan turned his coffee mug in his hands. They've been after this property for 4 months. 3 different law firms, 2 different sets of documents. Last set claimed there were environmental violations going back to 1987. Said my grandfather had dumped chemical waste on the back acre. He paused. My grandfather ran a clean shop his entire life. He was meticulous about it. The documents had his signature. Elena looked up. Forged, Logan said. I had them checked, but the forgery was good enough that a judge might not catch it, depending on the judge. She understood then. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to feel the shape of it. Someone was building a pattern. Forged documents with her signatures. Forged documents with the dead man's signature. Environmental violations that didn't exist. A company audit trail leading nowhere good. They're framing both of us, she said. Logan looked at her steadily. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Why do they want this land so badly? That's the question. He stood, moved to the window, looked out at the empty road. The rain was slowing. They want it badly enough to send 6 men with flashlights into the mountains at midnight. That's not a real estate deal. That's something else. Elena wrapped both hands around her mug. It was the warmest thing in the room. You were military, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd felt it in the way he moved through the space, the way he'd assessed her the moment she came through the door. He didn't answer right away. Navy, he said finally. A long time ago. She waited, but he didn't add anything to that. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the back of the building, past a wall she couldn't see through, his daughter was sleeping, 7 years old, and unaware that her father had just hidden a fugitive CEO under the floorboards. "They'll come back," Elena said. "Probably. And when they do, they'll have more people, and they'll be less polite about it." "Probably," he said again. She looked at the child's drawing above the register, the stick figures, the house, me and Daddy, in crayon that had gone waxy and dull with age. "I'm sorry," she said. "I came here and I brought all of this." "You came through a door in the rain," Logan said. "That's all." He picked up his mug, drained the rest of it, set it in the rack behind the counter with the quiet economy of someone used to operating in small spaces. "You didn't bring anything that wasn't already here." He turned off the low lamp and they sat for a while in the dark, with the rain on the roof and the clock on the wall. And Elena thought about Marcus Reed's 11-word message and what it had cost him to send it, and whether he was somewhere out there in the storm or somewhere she couldn't reach anymore. She didn't say any of that. Outside, the last of the flashlight beams swept once more across the ridge above the tree line, then went dark. The rain stopped around 3 a.m, the way storms in the mountains often do. Not gradually, not with warning, just a final gust and then silence, so complete it had weight to it. Elena noticed it because she'd been listening to the rain for hours, using it as cover the way someone uses background noise in a crowded room to say something they don't want overheard. Without it, the night felt exposed. She hadn't slept. She wasn't sure she'd even tried. Logan had given her the back office, a small room off the workshop with a cot that had clearly been used recently, a wool blanket folded at the foot of it, and a lamp with a pull chain that buzzed faintly when lit. She'd sat on the cot with her back against the wall and her ruined shoes on the floor beside her and gone through everything she could remember about the last 6 months. Every board meeting, every document she'd signed, every late-night call from her CFO about quarterly projections, trying to find the seam where the normal version of her company ended and whatever this was began. She couldn't find it. That was the part that kept her awake more than anything else. Not the fear, not the men with flashlights, but the fact that something this large had grown inside her company without her seeing it. Around 4, she heard Logan moving in the workshop. Not loudly. He had a way of moving that was almost without friction, like a man who'd spent years operating in places where noise was a liability. She pulled on her jacket and went out. He was at the workbench under a mounted light, looking at a set of documents spread across the surface. Not engine parts. Paper. Several pages, some of them in clear plastic sleeves, arranged in a specific order that suggested he'd done this before, laid things out like this, made sense of things visually. He looked up when she came in. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "No." He moved slightly to give her room at the bench without making a production of it. "Come look at this." The documents were the ones his grandfather had signed, allegedly. 3 sets of environmental filings dated across a span of 18 months, each one citing violations of soil contamination regulations on the eastern acre of the Mercer property. The signature on each one was the same, clear, consistent, an old man's deliberate cursive. "My grandfather died 11 years ago," Logan said. "These are dated 4 years ago." Elena leaned in. The paper itself was wrong. She could see it even without forensic equipment, the brightness of it, the way it held the light. New paper made to look old, but not quite right. Who prepared these? Firm called Caldwell and Associates, environmental consulting, based out of, he checked a separate page, an address in the financial district that turns out to be a mail forwarding service. A shell. A shell, he confirmed. He picked up one of the pages and held it at an angle under the light. "Look at the bottom right, under the notary stamp." She looked. It took her a moment to see it, a small mark, almost like a printer artifact, a faint repeated pattern in the background of the document. She knew that mark. She'd seen it before, on internal Whitmore Solutions documents. It was a security watermark, the kind embedded in paper purchased through the company's legal department printing vendor. She'd approved the contract for that vendor herself, 18 months ago. The silence between them stretched out. "That's," she started. "Your company's paper," Logan said. "Yes." He set the document down carefully. He didn't say anything else for a moment, just stood there with his hands flat on the bench, looking at the spread of papers. "They've been planning this for a long time," Elena said, At least 4 years. Maybe longer. He straightened up. The land matters, but it's not just the land. You don't build a 4-year paper trail to get a few acres of mountain property. You build it to make sure nobody looks twice when the real thing happens. The real thing being what? He looked at her. You tell me. You know your company better than I do. She did. And standing there in the low light of a dead man's workshop at 4 in the morning, she made herself say the things she'd been circling for the last 6 hours. We have a development project, Meridian. It's been in planning for 3 years. A mixed-use corridor, residential and commercial, running from the valley floor up through the northern foothills. It's the largest project in the company's history. The estimated value at completion is just over $1 billion. Logan waited. This property, she said carefully. Is it in the northern foothills? He picked up his phone, opened a map, turned it toward her. The Mercer property sat at the precise midpoint of the projected Meridian development corridor. Without it, the project had a gap, a section of the planned road that would require a reroute, adding 2 years and approximately $40 million to the timeline. With it, everything connected cleanly. Elena looked at the map for a long time. If someone controlled this land, she said slowly, and controlled the project, and had already removed me from leadership, they could redirect construction contracts, change the financial structure, take on investors who weren't part of the original agreement. How much are we talking about? If they restructured the contracts the way I think they would, redirecting toward entities they already controlled, easily $300 million in the first phase alone. She set the phone down. And nobody would look closely because the paperwork would show it was all authorized, all approved, all signed. Signed by you. Signed with my name. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. She hadn't cried yet, and she wasn't going to start now, but the tiredness was hitting her in waves. Someone has been creating documents with my signature for at least a year, maybe longer. I never saw any of it because it was all kept in a parallel record system. Something that looked like the real filing system but ran separately. Marcus found it. That's why he reached out to me. She paused. That's why he's gone. Logan absorbed that without reacting. She was coming to understand that his stillness wasn't coldness. It was the kind of steadiness that comes from having been in rooms where panic was the most dangerous thing in the room. Where would he keep the proof? Logan asked. If he found it and wanted to preserve it? Somewhere physical. Marcus was old school. He didn't trust cloud storage, didn't trust the company servers. He kept everything on paper or on encrypted drives that he controlled personally. She thought about him. Mid-50s, a careful man, the kind who double-checked the lock twice before leaving a room. He would have put it somewhere he considered safe. Somewhere connected to whatever message he sent you. He said the original documents were kept at a property in the mountains. He was going to meet me here. She stopped. He was going to meet me here. That's why he pointed me to this road. Logan was already looking at the room differently. She could see it in the shift of his attention, the way his eyes moved over the walls, the floor, the shelving, not searching exactly, more like reading. This was his station, Logan said. Not his, but he knew about it. He mentioned it once in passing months ago. He said he used to stop here when he drove up to the Ridge survey sites. He knew your grandfather. She looked at the walls, the tools, the pegboards. He would have known about the storage room. Logan crossed the workshop in about 4 steps and crouched beside the old fuel pump housing that sat in the corner. A relic, decorative now, the kind of thing people kept because it was too heavy to move and too nostalgic to throw away. He ran his hand along the base of it, pressed in 2 places, and then looked up at her. Give me a hand with this. The housing wasn't bolted to the floor. It was mounted on a low platform. And the platform, when they shifted the pump assembly aside, revealed a square of floor that had been relaid more recently than the surrounding concrete. Logan found the edge with a pry bar from the bench, worked it up carefully, and there it was. A waterproof case. Black polymer. About the size of a large hardcover book. Elena's hands weren't entirely steady when she reached for it. Inside, 3 external drives in separate padded slots, a manila envelope sealed with painter's tape, a folded sheet of paper with a handwritten note, the handwriting small, compressed, the kind produced by someone writing quickly in a cramped space. If you're reading this, I didn't make it to you. Everything you need is on the drives. The envelope has the original environmental reports. The real ones. The ones from 1987 that prove the Mercer land is clean. The recordings are on drive 2. Listen to the November meeting first. Mr. Elena read it twice. Then she set it down on the bench and stood very still for a moment. Logan didn't say anything. He picked up the note, read it, set it back. November meeting, he said. That would be the Q4 strategic planning session, November 14th. She remembered it. A long afternoon in the conference room, the kind of meeting that felt routine while it was happening. The whole executive leadership team was there. And Marcus was recording it. He must have been. She looked at the drives. If the recording is what I think it is, then we have something. He picked up the case, moved it to the bench under the light. But drives aren't useful without something to read them on. I have my laptop in my bag. She'd grabbed it automatically when she left her apartment, a reflex, the same one that made her grab her phone and her ID. I always have my laptop. She went to get it. Drive 2 was encrypted, but Marcus had included the key in the manila envelope, a 20-character alphanumeric string written on a strip of paper tucked behind the original environmental reports. Elena typed it in with Logan standing to her left, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold room, and the drive opened. There were 43 files, audio recordings, mostly, some video, a folder of scanned altered documents. She clicked on the file labeled November 14th Executive Strategic. The audio quality was good. Marcus had clearly had the recorder close to the table. The first several minutes were ordinary enough. Budget projections, a discussion about Q1 targets, a comment about catering for the holiday party. And then one of the voices said, "Let's talk about Whitmore, Elena's CFO, Gerald Fenn." She'd known him for 8 years. The timeline still works. By February, she'll have signed enough documents, or documents bearing her signature, to make the board's position straightforward. They won't have a choice. Standard removal for cause. Another voice. Warren Tate, the chief operating officer. And the Mercer property? We forced the transfer through the environmental violation ruling. The legal action is already filed. With the violations on record, the state can compel a sale. We've already arranged the purchase entity. A pause. The old man is dead. The son he's not a problem. He's been difficult about the paperwork. He'll stop being difficult. People get tired. We have time. And after the transfer? Then Meridian moves forward on the revised structure. Our structure. A sound. Ice in a glass. Elena spent 3 years building this project. She just doesn't know she was building it for us. Elena reached out and paused the recording. The room was very quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Logan's breathing was slow and even behind her. Gerald Fenn, she said. Her voice came out flat. I hired him. I went through 40 candidates, and I hired him because he had integrity. That was what everyone said about him, that he had integrity. People say a lot of things, Logan said. I know, She stopped. There wasn't a clean way to finish that sentence. She closed the audio file and opened the scanned documents folder instead, because sitting with what she felt about Gerald Fenn was not something she could afford right now. The documents were what Marcus had described. The parallel filing system, printed and scanned, contracts bearing her signature on dates when she had been out of the country, approval memos for transactions she'd never seen, environmental assessments that contradicted the company's own internal records. And there were other things. Property transfer filings, formation documents for 3 LLCs she'd never heard of. A contract between one of those LLCs and a construction firm awarded a contract to begin site preparation on the Meridian corridor. The contract was signed. The site preparation contract was already active. They've started, she said. They're not waiting for the board meeting. They've already begun redirecting the project. When's the board meeting? She checked the date on the contract, looked at her phone. No signal still, but the internal clock was accurate. 31 hours from now. Logan straightened up. He picked up the polymer case and closed it carefully, then looked at the room with the same systematic attention he'd given the documents. We should move, he said. They searched the building, but they weren't looking for the case. Once they think more carefully about it, they'll come back and look harder. Where do we go? There's a secondary road off the back acre. It's not on any map they'd have easy access to. It was a logging road, predates the county survey. It'll take us down to the valley floor a different way. He moved to the door of the workshop. I need 20 minutes. For what? Nora. He said the name simply, without explanation, but he didn't need to explain. His daughter, 7 years old, asleep in the house out back. Something in Elena's chest moved in a way she wasn't expecting. Of course, she said. Automaton. She waited in the workshop and tried not to listen, but the house was close and the night was quiet and she caught fragments. Logan's low voice, unhurried, explaining something to a child who had been woken in the dark. She couldn't hear words. She heard the tone of it, the particular cadence of a parent trying to make the extraordinary sound manageable. Then a small, sleepy voice, high-pitched, slightly annoyed in the way children are when they're woken up. And Logan's voice again, patient. He came back 15 minutes later with a backpack over one shoulder and a little girl on his other arm. She was maybe 6 or 7, dark-haired like him, wearing a fleece jacket over pajamas and holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear with the loose grip of the not quite awake. She looked at Elena with the frank, unfiltered evaluation that only children do. You have mud on your face, she said. Nora, Logan said mildly. She does, though. I know, it's okay. Logan set the girl down and she stayed close to his leg, not frightened, just oriented. He looked at Elena. My neighbor 2 miles down has agreed to take her. I'll drop her on the way. You already called. Old landline in the house. Still works. He zipped the backpack and reached down to take Nora's hand without looking, the automatic gesture of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She's done this before. Nora, you remember Mrs. Calloway? She has the yellow dog, Nora said. That's the one. Is the dog going to be awake? Probably not. Nora considered this with great seriousness. Then she looked at Elena again. Why are you here? Her car broke down, Logan said. She needed help. Nora looked at the ruined shoes, at the mud, at the laptop bag, then back at Elena with an expression that suggested she was old enough to know when the explanation she'd been given was the simplified version. Okay, she said, and said nothing else. They took the truck. Logan had it running in under 2 minutes, and it moved better than it looked. The engine was quiet and even, well-maintained in a way the exterior disguised. He drove without lights until they cleared the station property, then clicked them on once they hit the logging road. The road was rough. Elena held the laptop bag in her lap and braced with one hand against the dash, and didn't complain. In the back seat, Nora was asleep again within 4 minutes, the rabbit pressed to her chest. She does that? Elena asked quietly. Falls asleep anywhere. Something in his voice shifted when he talked about her. Not softer exactly, but less defended. She's a good traveler. She's had to be. Elena watched the trees move past in the headlights. Her mother? A beat. No. He kept his eyes on the road. She passed 4 years ago. I'm sorry. Yeah. He said it simply, without wanting anything in return for it, and she understood that was all he was going to give her on that particular subject. They drove in silence for a while. Dropped Nora at a farmhouse at the end of a gravel lane. A woman in her 60s appeared at the door before Logan had even knocked, as if she'd been awake anyway, and took the child inside with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Logan stood at the door for a moment, said something Elena couldn't hear, then came back to the truck. She'll be fine, he said. Not to Elena exactly, more like confirming it to himself. I know, Elena said, and meant it. They drove on. Ban. By the time they reached the valley road, the sky was going gray at the edges. Not dawn yet, but the thing before dawn, that particular hour where the dark starts to lose its confidence. Elena had been going through the scanned files on her laptop while they drove, using the cab light, reading everything Marcus had preserved. The more she read, the more complete the picture became, and the less she liked it. "There are 3 names," she said. Fenn, Tate, and someone identified in the documents only as the primary architect. The filings all reference approvals from the primary architect, but the name is always redacted. Someone with enough power that even the internal documents protect them. Someone on the board, most likely, one of the original investors. She scrolled back through. The LLCs were formed 8 months before I became CEO. Whoever this is, they've been planning the end of my tenure since before it began. Logan absorbed that. They brought you in to build the project, and to take the fall when they moved on it. She closed the laptop. I was useful, right up until I wasn't. That's a cold way to run a company. It's a cold business, she said, and then caught herself. That's what I used to say. I used to think that was just how it worked, that you had to know the difference between the people who were with you and the people who were using you. And apparently I didn't. He glanced at her, just briefly, then back to the road. You found out, he said. Some people never do. Some people aren't chased into the mountains and hidden in a hole in the floor. True. Was that almost a smile? She thought it might have been, hard to tell in the dark. The valley road opened up ahead, wide and flat, a county route that would take them south toward the city. Elena watched the white lines pass and thought about the 31 hours she had left and what the boardroom would look like when she walked back into it. Because she was going to walk back into it. That had solidified somewhere on the logging road between the trees. Not a plan yet, not a strategy, just a decision in the way that some decisions arrive fully formed without asking permission. She was going to walk back in, and she was going to make them face what they'd done. And she was going to do it with the recordings and the documents and the original environmental reports that cleared the Mercer land. But there was a problem, and it was the same problem it had been since 11 words on a phone screen at 9:47 the night before. She didn't know who she could trust. Logan, she said, yeah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. He waited. You don't know me. You've spent 6 hours with me in a garage, and I've brought serious trouble to your property and your daughter, and you have every reason to drop me at the nearest open gas station and drive home. She looked at him. Why are you still here? He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it instead of reaching for a quick answer. Because they forged my grandfather's name, he said finally, and because they called my daughter's name in that room to see if they could rattle me. He paused. And because you came through my door in the rain and you didn't pretend not to be scared. I respect that. People who pretend not to be scared get other people hurt. She didn't say anything to that. She wasn't sure there was anything to say. The sky was lightening steadily now, the gray going pink at the horizon, and the road ahead was clear and empty and full of problems they hadn't solved yet. But Elena Whitmore had the drives. She had the documents. She had a recording of 2 men describing exactly what they'd done and what they planned to do. And she had 30 hours left. That was going to have to be enough. She opened her laptop again and started making a list. The list Elena made in the truck had 7 items on it by the time they reached the valley floor, and she crossed out 4 of them before they'd gone another mile. Her corporate attorney crossed out. His firm had handled 3 of the contracts in the scanned documents. Maybe coincidence. She couldn't afford maybe. Her assistant, Diane, crossed out. Not because she suspected her, but because Diane's access to Elena's calendar was total, and whoever had arranged the forgery operation needed someone who knew exactly where Elena would be on the days documents were signed in her name. 2 of the board members she trusted most crossed out. Both of them were on the Meridian Oversight Committee. Both of them had been in the room on November 14th. That left 3 names on the list. A securities attorney she'd used for personal matters 2 years ago, someone outside the company entirely. A journalist at a financial news outlet who had covered Whitmore Solutions fairly and without evident agenda. And a woman named Patricia Osei, the company's former general counsel who had resigned 14 months ago and whose letter of resignation had been 3 lines long and said nothing. Elena had always wondered about that letter. Patricia left the company 14 months ago, she said, not really to Logan, just thinking out loud into the gray morning. She didn't give a reason, she just left. And I didn't push. I was in the middle of the Meridian financing rounds, and I told myself I'd follow up when things calmed down. She stopped. Things didn't calm down. You think she saw something? I think she's the kind of lawyer who doesn't quit a good job without a reason. Elena found Patricia's personal number in her phone's contact list. She'd kept it, one of those things you do without thinking about why. If I can reach her, not from your phone, Logan said. She looked at him. You lost signal last night, but before that they tracked you from the city. Your car's GPS, maybe, or your phone. Both. He kept his eyes on the road. They knew every move you made until you went into the mountains. That was true. She'd registered it somewhere last night and hadn't fully processed it. The way the SUVs had been positioned, the efficiency of it, the absence of any visible scrambling or improvisation on their part. They hadn't been reacting to her movements. They'd been ahead of them. She put her phone face down on her knee and looked at it. The tracker is probably in the phone itself, Logan said. Or there's a secondary device somewhere on your person or in your bag that you don't know about. You're telling me I need to take my bag apart. I'm telling you that before you call anyone, you need to assume they can hear it. She thought about Richard Hale's voice in the workshop the night before. How's your daughter? The particular patience of it, the practiced ease of a man delivering a threat in the language of small talk. She unzipped the laptop bag and started going through it. Berg. She found it in the inner pocket of the bag's front compartment, velcroed to the inside seam. Small, matte, black, about the size of a large button. She'd never seen it before, which meant someone had put it there recently, within the last week, almost certainly, because she used that pocket routinely and would have noticed. She held it up in the morning light and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it on the dashboard. What do you want to do with it? Logan asked. She thought about it. Nothing yet. If they've been tracking it, it going offline suddenly tells them something. If it keeps broadcasting from a moving vehicle heading south on the county road, it gives them something to follow that isn't us. He considered this. We need to not be in this vehicle long term then. Yes. I know someone, he said. He's not. He's not someone I stay in regular contact with. But he's trustworthy, and he's got a place in town where we could work without being visible, and he doesn't have any connections to Whitmore Solutions. Who is he? His name is Del Carver. He was in my unit. A brief pause. He got out a year before I did. He runs a small security consulting firm now, mostly private clients. He doesn't do corporate work. She looked at him. Why doesn't he do corporate work? Because corporations make him angry. Logan said it without elaboration, but something in his tone suggested this was a considered position rather than a grudge. He's good at what he does. He keeps his mouth shut, and he won't ask questions that aren't his business. Can you reach him? If I use a payphone. Elena almost laughed. Do payphones still exist? In some places. He took the next exit off the county road. We're about to find out. Us. The payphone was outside a 24-hour laundromat on the south edge of a small town called Garfield, 22 miles from the city. It had a cracked handset and a faded instruction panel, and it absolutely worked. Logan made the call, while Elena sat in the truck and drank coffee from a gas station 2 blocks back. Bad coffee, too hot, and she was grateful for every sip. He was on the phone for 6 minutes. When he came back, he had the particular expression of someone who has had a conversation that went several different directions before arriving at the right destination. He'll meet us, Logan said. He's not happy about the hour. Is he going to be a problem? No, he's just... Del takes a minute to warm up. He put the truck back in gear. Don't take it personally. I'm a CEO in mud-covered clothes who hasn't slept. I'm past taking things personally. This time she was certain it was a smile, even if it lasted less than a second. Chuch. Del Carver's place was the second floor above a print shop in a part of the city that was in the process of deciding what it wanted to be. Old warehouses next to new coffee bars, empty storefronts beside boutique fitness studios. The print shop was closed at this hour. Del met them at a side door that opened to a narrow staircase, and he was not what Elena had expected. He was shorter than Logan by 3 or 4 inches, built compact and solid, with a shaved head and a beard that was growing out unevenly, like he'd started growing it during a period of indecision and hadn't resolved it yet. He was wearing sweatpants and a faded army green t-shirt, and he looked at Elena with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was absolutely not warm. "You're Whitmore," he said. "Yes." "You look like you've had a bad night. Several hours of a very bad night, yes." He considered this, looked at Logan. "You brought a $1 billion liability to my door at 6 in the morning." "I did," Logan said. Dell was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back and let them in. The second floor was a single large space, one end set up as living quarters, minimal, the kind of sparse that comes from preference rather than poverty, and the other end arranged as a workspace with multiple monitors, a server rack against one wall, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams that Dell had made no effort to erase or hide. He was either very trusting or very confident that whoever came to this room already knew enough that the diagrams didn't matter. Elena decided it was probably the latter. "Coffee's on," Dell said, moving toward the kitchen end. "Then you're going to tell me everything, and I'm going to tell you what's stupid about your plan, and then we'll figure out what to actually do." He looked back over his shoulder at Elena. "No offense." "None taken," she said, and mostly meant it. She told it again from the beginning. Dell listened the way Logan listened, without interrupting, without performing sympathy, with the specific quality of attention that meant he was building something in his head while she talked. When she finished, he asked 4 questions, in order. The name of the shell company that held the forged environmental filings, the date the Meridian construction contract had been activated, the exact wording of Marcus Reed's note, and whether Elena had had her personal devices on her person during the last board meeting she'd attended. The last question made something cold run across the back of her neck. "Yes," she said, "my phone and my laptop." "Then they've had remote access to both for at least as long as since that meeting." Dell said it without drama, like reading a weather forecast. Microphone, camera, location, everything you've typed on that laptop in the last... How long ago was the board meeting? 3 weeks. In the last 3 weeks, they've read. He nodded at Logan. "The drives are clean. He hasn't connected them to a network device?" "I connected them to my laptop," Elena said, the cold thing spreading. "Here." Dell was already moving. He took the laptop from her, pulled the battery in one practiced motion, a model she'd thought didn't have a removable battery, but apparently if you knew where to press, and set it on the counter. "The drive data is still intact. The files you opened, they may now know you have. Depends on whether they were actively monitoring." He looked at her steadily. "You opened audio files?" "The November recording. Yes." Dell breathed out through his nose. "Then they know you have it, and they know you've heard it." He looked at Logan. Timeline just compressed. Logan nodded like this was information he'd already factored in. "How long before they move?" "If I were them?" Dell checked the clock on the wall. A large analog one, similar to the one at the station, Elena thought, and wondered if this was something military people carried with them, a preference for analog, for things that worked without a network. 6 hours, maybe. They'll want to confirm the board meeting can still proceed on schedule before they do anything drastic. Removing you quietly is cleaner than removing you loudly. He looked at Elena. "They'd rather you disappear than make a scene." "I'm not going to disappear." "I know that," Dell said. "I'm telling you what they want." "What I want," Elena said, "is to be in that boardroom before the meeting ends, with the drives, the documents, the recordings, and something that makes it impossible for them to discredit everything Marcus collected." Dell looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but the preliminary movement toward it. "The problem," he said, "is chain of custody. You found the drives in a hole in a floor. There's no verifiable record of where they came from. A good attorney, and these people have good attorneys, will argue the files were fabricated after the fact. Then we need something they can't argue was fabricated." She looked at the whiteboard, at Dell's diagrams. The LLCs, the shell companies, those have state registration records. Those exist independently. If someone with the right credentials pulled those records tonight— Already thinking about it, Dell said. He turned to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. The Caldwell and Associates filing address, the mail forwarding service, is the thread. Mail forwarding services are required by law to maintain client records. Court order gets those records. A court order requires a judge, Logan said. A judge, or an emergency petition through a clerk who's authorized to approve after-hours emergency motions. Dell wrote something on the board. I know someone in the federal clerk's office. We went to school together. She owes me nothing, but she's honest, which is better. He wrote something else. The securities attorney on Elena's list, Victoria Marsh. Does she do federal work? She has, yes. Then she's the one who files the petition. He capped the marker. While that's in motion, we need a copy of everything on those drives sent to someone outside this room who can't be gotten to before the board meeting. A journalist, a regulatory body, someone. The financial journalist, Elena said. Owen Parr. He's been covering the company fairly. He has sources inside the SEC. Better, Dell said. If he contacts the SEC directly with the files, it creates a regulatory record that exists before the board meeting. Whatever happens in that room, there's already an external investigation triggered. He looked at Logan. You're comfortable with what this means for the property documents? The originals are in the case, Logan said. Marcus kept the real environmental survey. If we submit that to the state environmental office, it triggers a review of the forged filings, which means anyone who filed those documents is now under a state investigation that also exists before the board meeting. Dell nodded slowly. You stack the external pressures. By the time Elena walks into that room, there are 3 separate official processes already running that Fenn and Tate and whoever the primary architect is cannot stop without making themselves look guilty. Elena looked at the whiteboard, at the shape of it. It's not enough, she said. Both men looked at her. The recordings, the documents, the external filings, all of that is evidence of what they did to the company. But the board will want to know why. She pushed her coffee mug to the side and leaned forward on the table. The primary architect, the person whose name is redacted in every document. That person has board-level access, board-level cover. If I walk in there and I can't name them, Fenn and Tate become the story, and whoever's above them walks out of the room clean. Dell tapped his marker against his palm. The LLC formation documents have a registered agent. That's public record. I looked. It's a law firm. The firm represents the LLC, not the individual. The law firm has billings, protected by attorney-client privilege. Unless, Logan said, and both of them looked at him, the law firm is the same one that filed the forged environmental documents. Silence. Dell lowered the marker. If it is, then attorney-client privilege doesn't cover fraud, Elena said. It's the crime-fraud exception. If the attorney assisted in the actual commission of the fraud, not just advised on it, the privilege falls. Do you know which firm handled the environmental filings? Dell asked her. It was Caldwell and Associates on the documents, but Caldwell is a shell. The actual filings were notarized by a real attorney whose name I can find. She reached for the polymer case and opened it, pulling the manila envelope free. Went through the environmental reports until she found the one with the full notary information. She read the name. Edwin Marsh, licensed in this state. Dell was typing before she finished the sentence. He had a secondary laptop, air-gapped, she noticed, not connected to any visible network, that he worked on with the quick economical movement of someone who spent most of his working hours at a keyboard. He typed, read, typed again. Edwin Marsh is a senior partner at Kellner, Marsh & Holt, he said, which is the same firm that served as initial registered agent for Meridian Development Holdings, LLC, one of the 3 LLCs in your documents. The room was very still. That's not coincidence, Logan said. No, Elena said. It's not. And Kellner, Marsh, and Holt represent— Dell typed again and stopped. He looked up at her with an expression that had changed in some way she couldn't immediately name. They represent 4 members of your board. Which 4? He read the names. One of them was Arthur Vance, chairman of the board, a man who had recruited Elena to the company himself, who had called her the most capable executive he'd ever worked with. who had given a speech at her first annual investor meeting about the importance of leadership with integrity, a man she had trusted more than almost anyone in her professional life. She sat back. "Vance," she said. The word came out without inflection because she didn't trust herself to put any in it. "His name's not on any of the documents," Dell said. Not gently, but not without care. "He's careful. Everything is at arm's length, but if Kellner, Marsh, and Holt are both notarizing the fraud filings and representing him personally, he's the primary architect," Elena said. Nobody disputed it. She looked at the whiteboard. At the list of things they needed to do in the next, she checked the clock. 23 hours. Her mind was working in the particular way it worked when the problem was very large and the time was very short, a kind of cold compartmentalization that she'd always been good at and had never been proud of exactly, but had always been grateful for. "We need to get back to the station," she said. Logan and Dell both looked at her. "The surveillance devices you said you noticed," she said to Logan. "When Hale's people were there, when they searched, you said there were hidden devices, tracking equipment, surveillance, cameras probably." "Yeah. If those devices were recording last night, if they recorded the search, recorded Hale in the building..." She stopped. Let him complete the logic. Logan's expression shifted. "He was there, in person, in my building. Richard Hale, head of Whitmore Corporate Security, conducting a personal nighttime search of a private property in connection with a missing CEO." She looked at him steadily. "That's not something he can explain away as routine. That's him, on camera, operating outside his authority at the direction of someone." "At the direction of Vance," Dell said, "if the footage exists. And if it's recoverable," Logan said. "Devices like that in a location like that, they might transmit remotely, in which case whoever planted them has the feed. Or they might store locally, in which case..." "We'd have to go back," Elena said. "We'd have to go back," he confirmed. She already knew she was going to say yes. She didn't like it. The station felt like a closed chapter, a place she'd survived once and didn't want to test again. But the footage of Hale on that property was the kind of evidence that didn't require a chain of custody argument, didn't require explaining how Marcus Reed had hidden drives in a fuel pump housing. It was exactly what it looked like. A man doing something he shouldn't be doing, in a place he had no right to be. "We need the tracker out of the bag," she said, "before we go anywhere." Dell was already standing. He had a device that looked like a modified radio, which he ran over the bag, the laptop case, Elena's jacket, her shoes. He found a second device she hadn't noticed, sewn into the interior lining of her laptop case, smaller than the first one, more sophisticated. He set both on the counter with the faint air of someone collecting insects. "You were well monitored," he said. "Apparently. The devices go in a sealed bag. They keep broadcasting from here while you move." He handed Logan a different phone, a cheap prepaid model already activated. "Clean. Keep it off unless you need it." "Weapons?" Logan said, and Elena was surprised to find she wasn't surprised by the question. Dell looked at him. "What do you have?" "Nothing on me." Dell went to a cabinet on the far wall, opened it with a key from his pocket. He came back with a handgun in a holster, compact, dark, and a box of ammunition. He set them on the table in front of Logan. Logan looked at the gun. He didn't reach for it immediately. Something passed through his expression that Elena didn't have a name for. Not reluctance, not exactly. More like an acknowledgement of a distance he'd put between himself and a version of himself that he was now closing again. He picked it up, checked it with the practiced hands of someone who'd done it so many times it was below the level of thought. Holstered it. "Okay," he said. His voice was the same as it always was, even, quiet. Dell looked at Elena. "You should stay here." "No." "Elena." "Those devices are in the building that belongs to his family," she said, and she heard her own voice, the particular flatness of it that her executive assistant had once described as the voice that ends meetings. "Marcus left that evidence specifically for me to find. If there is footage of Hale on that property, I am the person with the legal standing to retrieve it." She held Dell's gaze. "I am not going to sit in a print shop in the city while Logan goes back to that station alone." Dell looked at Logan. Logan looked back at Dell with an expression that communicated something between them that didn't need words. "Fine," Dell said, turning away. "Be back before noon. I'll have the contact list ready, and Victoria Marsh briefed by 8. What? They drove back north in Dell's car, a gray sedan, deliberately unremarkable, the kind that disappeared in traffic. And the morning came fully on around them, the sky going from pink to flat white, the mountains resolving out of the dark into actual mountains with shapes and shadows and snow on the upper ridges. Elena watched them and thought about Arthur Vance. She thought about the speech he'd given at her first investor meeting. She remembered standing off to the side of the stage, nervous in a way she hadn't let herself be in years, and watching him at the podium talking about integrity and leadership, and feeling not moved exactly, but confirmed. Like she was in the right place, like the people around her were the people she thought they were. She thought about how good he was at that, how many years he'd been practicing it, how easy she'd made it. "You're quiet," Logan said, thinking. "About Vance." She looked at him. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Know what I'm thinking." He was quiet for a moment, watching the road. "You gotta look. Like something you trusted turned out to be made of the wrong material." She thought about that. "That's accurate." "I've had that look before," he said. "Different context." She didn't ask what context. She thought she could guess. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. The particular education that comes from putting your faith in something that fails at the moment it matters most. The mountains were fully visible now, and the Mercer station was 20 minutes ahead, and somewhere in the walls or ceiling of that old building there were recording devices that might or might not have captured the face of a man who had betrayed her trust for money and power. Elena rolled her shoulders, rolled her neck, straightened up in the seat. 20 minutes. She had 20 hours after that. She started planning. The station looked different in daylight. Smaller than she remembered, more clearly abandoned. The red stripe on the fascia faded almost to pink. The parking lot was empty. The road was empty. The mountains behind the building were very still. Logan parked on the logging road and they came in through the back, the same way they'd left, moving along the tree line. He stopped her twice with a hand on her arm, once to watch a length of road for 30 seconds before crossing it, once to look at something she couldn't see in the brush on the building's east side. "Wire," he said. "Ground level. Somebody set a perimeter alert." "When?" "Recent. It wasn't here last night." He looked at it without touching it. "Not sophisticated. Tripwire connected to a signal device. It would alert whoever was monitoring that someone entered the property." Elena looked at the wire and then at Logan. "They expected we'd come back." "They expected someone might." He studied the entry point to the building. "There may be a person inside." She absorbed this. "Or monitoring remotely." "Or both." He was quiet for a moment. "Stay here." She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and decided not to. He moved along the wall of the building and she watched him do it. The particular quality of his movement in that moment, different from how he moved at the workbench or in Dell's space or behind the wheel of the truck. Low and even and without wasted motion, each step placed with a deliberateness that looked unhurried but covered ground quickly. She'd read profiles of special operations personnel. She'd sat across from military contractors in boardrooms. She had never actually watched someone move through space the way Logan Mercer moved through space when it mattered, and she understood now why people who'd served with him had described it as a specific kind of confidence she had no word for. He came around the back of the building, reached the back door, paused for 6 seconds, then opened it. 1 minute, 2. He appeared at the door and waved her forward. Ute. Inside, he'd already found the first camera. A small device above the fuel pump housing, partially obscured by a length of old rubber tubing, angled toward the front of the room. He pointed to it without touching it. "That's not standard surveillance equipment," he said quietly. "That's custom. Somebody put this in specifically." He looked around the workshop. "There'll be another one," covering the door. He found it above the pegboard tool wall. Same type, same installation method. 2 cameras, overlapping fields of view. Anyone who'd entered through the front door in the last however long would be on both recordings. Where does it store? Elena asked. Local or remote? He examined the back of the first camera carefully. Local, there's a micro SD card. He looked at her. If I take it, they'll know someone was here. The device will go offline. They already know someone might come, she said. The tripwire. Yeah. Take it. He did. Both cards, moved with the kind of care that came from having once, she imagined, done very similar things in places where the cost of error was much higher than this. He wrapped them in a cloth from the workbench. We need to leave, he said. They were almost at the door when they heard the vehicles. 2 of them, by the sound, coming up the main road fast, not bothering with quiet anymore. Logan looked at her. She looked at him. There was a half-second where everything recalibrated. Back way, he said. They went. The logging road was 40 yards behind the building through a stand of pine, and they covered it in under a minute, Elena abandoning any concern about noise in favor of speed. And she was aware that Logan was behind her. Not ahead, behind, covering the distance between them and the building, and that this was a choice he'd made deliberately without discussing it. They reached the car. Logan had it moving before his door was fully closed. No lights, the logging road rough under the tires and the pines close on both sides. She could hear, faintly, voices from the direction of the station, then the crunch of footsteps on gravel, then nothing as the trees thickened and muffled everything outside the car. Neither of them spoke for 2 minutes. Then Elena opened her hand and looked at the 2 small cards in her palm. Tell me these are enough, she said. Logan kept his eyes on the road ahead. We're about to find out, he said, and pushed the car harder through the trees toward the valley and the city and the thing that was waiting at the end of all of this. Del had coffee waiting and a problem he'd found while they were gone. He met them at the side door with the kind of controlled urgency that Elena was coming to recognize as his default register. Not panic, not even close, but a compressed quality to his movements that meant the margins had gotten smaller while they were away. The board meeting got moved up, he said, before they were fully through the door. 2 hours. It starts at 1 o'clock. Elena checked the clock on the wall. 8:47. Why? She said. Someone called an emergency session. It went out to members at 7 this morning. He moved back to his workspace and pulled up an email on the secondary monitor, forwarded from a board member's address she didn't recognize. The stated reason is a material security concern related to company leadership, which means someone told the board you've gone missing and implied it wasn't voluntary. They're saying I'm compromised, she said. They're implying it, carefully. The language is all, look at this. He pointed to a phrase in the email. Given circumstances that may reflect on the reliability and continuity of executive leadership. Nothing actionable, nothing they can be held to. But any board member reading that who doesn't know what's happening is going to walk into that room at 1 o'clock, ready to vote for interim leadership. How many members are going to walk in knowing exactly what's happening? At least 4, Del said. Vance plus the 3 board members Kellner, Marsh, and Holt represent. Maybe more, depending on how much Vance has shared. Logan set the 2 micro SD cards on the desk in front of Del. We got these from the station. Del looked at them, reached for a card reader without comment, plugged the first card in, and waited while the files loaded. The footage was time-stamped. The first camera had been installed 3 weeks ago, the second one 10 days after that, which meant whoever had placed them had been surveilling the station in stages. Del fast-forwarded through days of empty rooms and occasional footage of Logan working in the shop, and then hit the timestamp from the previous night. He slowed to normal speed. The camera angle caught the front room clearly. You could see the door, the counter, the map on the wall. At 12:17 a.m., the door opened and 4 men came in. The quality was good enough that faces were readable. Del paused on the clearest frame of Richard Hale, standing in the middle of the room, hands at his sides, looking at Logan with the patient confidence of a man who believed the conversation was going to go the way he wanted. Del saved the frame, then the next several minutes of footage, cutting to the most legible moments. This is usable, he said. It wasn't enthusiasm, it was assessment. What's the quality like for transmission? Logan asked. Good enough. Owen Parr is going to want this more than almost anything else we're sending him. Dell looked at Elena. Speaking of which, Victoria Marsh called back 20 minutes ago. And? The emergency petition went through. A federal clerk signed off on it at 7:50. The registered agent records for the 3 LLCs are being pulled as of right now. He paused. She also said to tell you, and I'm quoting, I knew something was wrong 14 months ago, and I should have called you. Elena looked at him. Patricia Osei said that? Victoria Marsh, your securities attorney. Victoria said that. Yes. Elena absorbed this. Victoria Marsh had handled her personal securities filings for 2 years and had never once given her cause to doubt her. The idea that Victoria had seen the edge of something and hadn't said anything, the idea that there had been people around her who'd noticed the smell of something wrong and had stayed quiet. That was its own particular kind of loneliness, and she put it away for later, for a moment when she had the time to feel it properly. What about the State Environmental Office? She asked. The original survey is submitted. They've opened a review of the 1987 filings. It's in their system as of 8:15. Dell turned to face her fully. Elena, you have 4 hours. The external processes are running. The footage exists. The recordings from Marcus's drives exist. Victoria is preparing a summary document for the board that presents the chain of evidence. He stopped. But you walking into that room is the part none of the rest of this replaces. If you're not there, they table the investigation, install interim leadership, and Vance controls what happens next. I know. You don't have security. You don't have your legal team. You don't have... I know, she said again, and her voice had the thing in it that ended conversations, but she said it without edge. Dell, I know what I don't have. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and turned back to the monitor. She looked at Logan. He was leaning against the wall near the window, arms crossed, watching her with the quiet, level attention he'd been giving her since the beginning. Not waiting for her to fall apart, not anticipating it, just present. I need to look like I didn't sleep in a gas station, she said. There's a bathroom in the back, Dell said without turning around. Clean towels in the cabinet. I think there's a spare jacket somewhere. Might be too big. It'll work. She went. What? The woman who looked back at her from the mirror in Dell's bathroom was not the woman who appeared on the company's annual report, or in the financial press photographs, or in the portrait that hung in the lobby of Whitmore Solutions headquarters. That woman was polished in a way that had taken years to construct, the precise presentation of someone who had decided, early, that being taken seriously meant leaving nothing to chance. This woman had a faint cut above her right eye. Her hair was pulled back with a rubber band she'd found in her jacket pocket. She was wearing a wrinkled shirt and Dell's spare jacket, which was dark gray and fit across the shoulders if not anywhere else. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had run through a forest in the rain and hidden in a basement and driven through the night and hadn't stopped moving since. She looked, she thought, like someone who had actually been through something. She cleaned the cut, fixed her hair as well as she could, stood up straight and looked at herself again. It would have to be enough. And when she came back out, Logan was at the table with Dell, the two of them looking at a printed map of the city's financial district. The block where Whitmore Solutions headquarters occupied the top 4 floors of a glass and steel tower. Dell had marked 2 entrances, a parking structure, and what appeared to be a service corridor. Front entrance is going to have Hale's people, Dell said, not looking up. He knows you're coming, or he will soon once the station cameras go offline and the tripwire gets reviewed. He'll have coverage on the building. I have a card key for the service entrance, Elena said, assuming they haven't deactivated it. They may not have. Cutting building access generates a paper trail, IT logs, security logs. If they're still trying to maintain the appearance that this is routine, they'd leave your credentials active until after the meeting. That's a significant if. Yes, Dell said, it is. There's a board member, Elena said, Carolyn Vreeland. She and Vance have had conflict over the Meridian financing structure. She's been pushing for more conservative debt ratios for the last 8 months. She's not in his corner on everything. She thought about it. She's not in anyone's corner, really. She just follows the numbers. Is she on the list of members Kellner, Marsh, and Holt represent? No. Can you reach her before the meeting? if she answers her personal number. Elena picked up the clean prepaid phone Dell had given Logan. Can I use it? Logan said. She dialed from memory. It rang 4 times, and she was composing the words of a voicemail in her head when Carolyn Vreeland picked up. Who is this? Carolyn's voice was crisp, guarded. She was in her mid-60s, a former investment banker who had 3 decades of practice at not showing her hand. Carolyn, it's Elena. A beat. Elena. Not warmth, but not hostility either. Careful. I need you to listen to me for 5 minutes without interrupting. I know what the meeting is about. I know what Vance is going to say when it starts, and I'm going to be there before it ends. A longer beat. Where are you? That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I have evidence of a fraud scheme that was designed to look like my fraud scheme. It involves forged documents, shell companies, a parallel accounting system, and recordings of Fenn and Tate discussing the plan in detail. Marcus Reed collected it before he disappeared. Marcus disappeared because he found it, Carolyn. She kept her voice level. I need 5 minutes at the front of that room. I need someone to make sure the meeting doesn't conclude before I get there. That's all I'm asking. Another pause, longer than the others. Elena could hear distantly what sounded like a car interior. Carolyn was already en route to the building. I'm not going to promise you anything, Carolyn said finally. But I've been looking at the Q4 subsidiary filings for the last week, and there are numbers in there that don't reconcile with anything I've seen in 3 years on this board. I've been asking Fenn for a meeting about it for 10 days, and he keeps rescheduling. She paused. I'll be in the room. That's enough, Elena said. Thank you. She hung up and handed the phone back to Logan. He was watching her the way he'd watched her since last night, as if she was the thing in the room most worth keeping track of. She'll buy time, Elena said, whether she means to or not. Carolyn doesn't let a meeting end when she has open questions. How long do we have before we need to leave? Logan asked Dell. Dell checked the clock. 90 minutes if we're going to park at the structure and use the service entrance. 75 to be safe. Elena looked at the polymer case on Dell's table. The drives, the documents, the cards from the cameras. She thought about how to carry them into that building in a way that meant they couldn't be intercepted in the lobby, couldn't be confiscated in the hallway by Hale's people before she reached the boardroom floor. I need a copy, she said. Everything that's on those cards and the drives, I need a complete copy that goes somewhere else. Not here, not with me. Dell was already reaching for a second card reader. Victoria Marsh's office? And Owen Parr, encrypted transfer to both, time-stamped. She looked at the clock. If something happens before I reach that room, there's already a complete record in 2 external locations that has nothing to do with me or the company. 20 minutes, Dell said. Give me 20 minutes. She gave him 19. Mama said. They left Dell's place at 10:38 in a car he'd arranged. Not his sedan, which he was keeping as a decoy with the 2 tracking devices still broadcasting from inside it, but a rental that had been sitting in the lot of a hotel 2 blocks over, booked under a name that wasn't any of theirs. Dell had a system. She didn't ask how. Logan drove. Elena sat in the passenger seat with the polymer case on her lap and tried to prepare what she was going to say. That was the part nobody else could do for her. She could walk into that room with every piece of evidence Marcus had died trying to preserve, and if she didn't say the right things in the right order to the right people, it wouldn't matter. The board wasn't a jury. It wasn't a court. There was no procedural requirement that they listen, no rule that said they had to consider evidence submitted by someone who had theoretically been derelict in her oversight responsibilities. Arthur Vance had been working them for years. He knew how each of them thought. He knew what each of them cared about. She knew these things too. She'd sat across from them for 3 years. The question was whether she could get in front of them before Vance finished what he'd started. You've been quiet for a while, Logan said, thinking about what I'm going to say. Do you know yet? I know the beginning and the end. The middle I'll figure out when I can see their faces. She watched the city come up around them as they moved south. The transition from the industrial edges of Dell's neighborhood to the glass and pavement certainty of the financial district, everything clean and vertical and very sure of itself. I used to be good at that, reading a room and adjusting. Used to be? I haven't had to do it in a while. When you're the person running the room, you stop having to read it. She looked at him. That's probably something I should have paid more attention to. He nodded slowly. She wasn't sure if he was agreeing with her about rooms or about something larger. Logan. She said it, and then wasn't sure how to follow it. After this, whatever happens in there, what happens to the station? He was quiet for a moment. I fix it up. It was what I was planning before all of this. He kept his eyes on the road. My grandfather built it. He ran it for 40 years. When my father didn't want it, my grandfather left it to me, and I've been letting it sit because he stopped. I don't know exactly why, because moving forward with it felt like admitting I was staying, I think. Staying where? Here. This version of my life. He changed lanes, checked the mirror. After my wife died, I had this idea that I was just between things, that the life I was actually going to live was still coming. The station was part of the old life, and I didn't know how to make it part of the new one. He paused. Nora's almost 8. At some point between things just becomes your life. She thought about what to say to that and couldn't find it, so she said nothing, which felt correct. The parking structure was 3 blocks from the tower. Logan pulled into it, and they sat in the dim concrete quiet for a moment. You don't have to come up, she said. I know. This is the part that's mine to do. I know that too. He looked at her. But the service entrance and the elevator and the hallway, those are the parts where Hale's people are. I'll take you to the door. She thought about arguing. She looked at his face and didn't. The service entrance accepted her card key. She felt the click of it with a relief that was more physical than she expected. Her shoulders dropping a half-inch, a breath going out of her that she hadn't known she was holding. They moved through the service corridor. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and recycled air, and took the freight elevator to the 32nd floor. The elevator opened to a narrow hallway behind the main floor reception that she knew because she'd walked it twice during a fire drill and once when the main elevators were down for maintenance. It ran along the back of the building and led out through a door near the IT server room, about 40 feet from the conference suite where the board meeting was being held. The hallway was empty. She pushed the door open slowly. The main corridor beyond was not empty. There were 2 men standing near the elevator bank who had the particular posture of people who were standing there for a reason. Neither of them was looking her direction. She turned back to Logan. Go, he said quietly. She didn't move immediately. She stood in the doorway with the polymer case under her arm and looked at him. In the fluorescent half-light of the service corridor, in Dell's jacket and her ruined professionalism, and tried to find something adequate to say. You came through a door in the rain, he said, before she could. Remember what I said. She remembered. You didn't bring anything that wasn't already here. She went. He nodded. The conference suite doors were closed. She could hear voices from inside, the low collective murmur of a room where multiple people were talking at once, the particular restless energy of a meeting that hadn't settled into agreement. She pressed her hand flat against the door for 1 second. Then she opened it and walked in. The room went quiet in stages. The people nearest the door, 2 board members she recognized, both of whom looked at her with expressions she couldn't immediately classify, stopped first. Then the quiet spread, until the only sound was the ventilation system and the faint traffic noise from 32 floors below. There were 11 people at the table. Gerald Fenn and Warren Tate sat on the left side, midway down. She clocked them immediately, noted that Fenn's face went through 4 different things in about 2 seconds before settling on something carefully neutral. Tate's jaw tightened visibly. Carolyn Vreeland was at the far end, and when Elena caught her eye, Carolyn gave her nothing. No nod, no acknowledgement, just looked at her with the same contained attention she gave everything. It was, Elena understood, the best she was going to get. Arthur Vance was at the head of the table. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he expected and prepared for, and is nonetheless slightly irritated to see. He was in his 70s, silver-haired, the kind of face that photographed well and conveyed authority without effort. He had run 4 companies in his career and been credited with saving 2 of them, and every person in this room knew it, and he had been counting on that knowledge his entire life. Elena, his voice was even. We were given to understand you were unavailable. I'm available, she said. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Vance. She did not ask permission. She set the polymer case on the table in front of her and she sat down. The silence stretched. This meeting was called, Ben started. I know why the meeting was called, she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I know what was in the email that went out at 7 this morning, and I know who sent it, and I know what vote was supposed to happen before I walked through that door. She looked around the table, not at Vance, not yet, but at the others. The ones who didn't know, the ones who'd come into this room with genuine uncertainty and were now sitting with their hands very still and their faces reconfiguring. I want to start with an apology. That wasn't what anyone was expecting. She could feel it, the room's attention shifting, recalibrating. I have been the CEO of this company for 3 years. In that time, a fraud scheme was constructed inside this organization using my name, my authority, and my signature. I didn't see it. That's a failure of oversight that belongs to me, and I'm not here to pretend otherwise. She paused. But I'm here to show you that the failure of oversight and the commission of the fraud are 2 different things, committed by 2 different sets of people. Elena, Vance's voice, patient. This isn't the appropriate venue for... I have recordings, she said. Vance stopped. I have recordings of an executive planning meeting held on November 14th of last year, in which Gerald Fenn and Warren Tate discuss in detail the plan to use forged documents bearing my signature to redirect Meridian project contracts toward entities they control. I have the original environmental survey of the Mercer property, demonstrating that the violation filings used to force a property transfer were fabricated, using Whitmore Solutions Company paper and a notary whose firm simultaneously serves as registered agent for the shell companies involved. She opened the polymer case. She set the drives on the table. She set the manila envelope. She set the printed summary Dell had prepared, Victoria Marsh's signature at the bottom. I have the financial records Marcus Reed collected before he disappeared, and I have surveillance footage of Richard Hale conducting an unauthorized nighttime search of a private property as part of an effort to locate and silence me after I came into possession of this evidence. The room was so still she could hear someone's wristwatch. As of this morning, she continued, a federal clerk has ordered the registered agent records of the 3 LLCs connected to this scheme. The State Environmental Office has opened a review of the fabricated violation filings. The complete evidence package has been transmitted to a securities attorney and to Owen Parr at the Financial Register. She looked around the table again, and this time she included Vance. An independent investigation is already underway. This board can participate in that process transparently, or it can be investigated as part of it. That is the only choice left on the table. Fenn moved first. She'd known he would. He'd always been the one who talked when he should have stayed quiet, the one who mistook fluency for control. These allegations are, he started. Gerald. She said just his name. That was all. He stopped. She put the first drive in the laptop Dell had sent with her, a clean machine, nothing compromised, and she played the November recording. She didn't play all of it. She didn't need to. She played 4 minutes, the part where Fenn's voice described the forged signatures, the part where Tate said the old man is dead, the part where Fenn said Elena spent 3 years building this project. She just doesn't know she was building it for us. When she stopped the recording, 3 of the board members were looking at Fenn. One of them was Carolyn Vreeland, and her expression had finally broken open into something, not anger exactly, but a kind of cold clarity that Elena recognized as the look of someone who had just had a number reconciled that had been bothering them for months. Gerald, one of the other board members said, an older man named Hargrove, whom Elena had always found tedious and today found she was deeply grateful for. What is she talking about? Fenn said nothing. His face had gone the particular grayish color of a man realizing that the version of events he'd prepared for had just become insufficient. Tate, Elena noticed, had not moved at all. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, looking at a point on the surface about 18 inches in front of him, as if the answer to everything was there if he could only see it. He wasn't going to say anything. She'd expected that. Tate was the kind of man who always believed that silence was survivable, right up until it wasn't. Vance was the one she was watching. He was watching her back. He had not moved since she'd started speaking. He had not shifted in his chair or reached for the water glass in front of him or looked at Fen or Tate. He was watching her with the expression of a man who is recalculating very quickly and very quietly. And she knew him well enough, or thought she did, to know that what he was calculating was not how to fight this, but how to survive it. That was the thing about men like Arthur Vance. They didn't panic. They adapted. They looked for the version of events in which they came through. She got there before he did. Arthur, she said. The use of his first name was deliberate. The shift of the room's attention to him was palpable. I know that your name isn't on any of the documents, she said. I know that you kept yourself separated from the operational details at every stage, and I know that a very good attorney could probably construct a case that the connections are circumstantial. She held his gaze. But the firm that notarized the fraudulent environmental filings is the same firm that represents you personally. That's not circumstantial. That's a thread. And once an independent investigator starts pulling it, every document, every communication, every decision this board has made in the last 4 years gets reviewed. He said nothing. You have a choice right now, she said. You can fight this in this room and in every subsequent legal proceeding for years, and it will cost you everything you've built. Not because of what's provable today, but because of what an investigation will find once it has subpoena power. She paused. Or you can do what you've always told me a good leader does when the numbers don't work. She let it sit there for a moment. You can stop the bleeding. The room breathed. Vance looked at her for a long time. The clock on the wall moved through it. No one else spoke. Then Vance turned to Hargrove. I think, he said, and his voice was exactly as measured as it always was, that we should call a recess and contact the company's outside counsel. That's not... Fen started. Gerald. Vance's voice this time was something else entirely. The patience was still there, but underneath it was something that had no patience in it at all. Be quiet. Fen went quiet. Hargrove nodded. I'll second a motion for recess. Moved, said Carolyn Vreeland immediately, her eyes on Fen. In the hallway afterward, after the board had filed out in a silence that had several different textures depending on who was creating it, after Fen and Tate had been quietly separated by 2 men from outside counsel's office, who appeared as if they'd been waiting nearby, after Vance had left without looking at her again, Elena stood near the window at the end of the corridor and felt the particular decompression of someone who has been holding something together by force and can now, carefully, let go. Her hands were shaking slightly. She noticed it and let them shake. Logan was in the service corridor. She knew that. She could feel it somehow, the knowledge that he was on the other side of the door 40 feet away. She thought about going to find him and stayed at the window instead for another minute, looking out at the city below. The streets were full of people who'd had an ordinary Tuesday. She envied them, briefly, and then didn't. Carolyn Vreeland appeared beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The Q4 subsidiary filings, Elena said, the numbers that didn't reconcile. They've been bothering me for 6 weeks, Carolyn said. I kept thinking it was a data entry error. It wasn't. No. Carolyn looked out the window. Marcus Reed, do you know where he is? Not yet. That one she couldn't put away cleanly. It sat in her chest without a clean place to land. I'm hoping the investigation finds him. I hope so too. Carolyn was quiet for a moment. What you did in there, the way you laid it out, you knew Vance wasn't going to fall on a sword for Fen and Tate. No, he's never done anything that didn't serve Arthur Vance. So you gave him a way to serve Arthur Vance while also dismantling the scheme. I gave him an argument for why fighting it is worse than stopping it. Elena looked at her reflection in the window glass. That's not justice, but it's how you get someone like him to step aside without burning everything down around him. And if the investigation finds more, then the investigation finds more. Elena turned away from the window. I don't control what it finds. I just had to get us to the place where it could run. Carolyn nodded slowly. There was something in her expression that wasn't approval exactly, but was adjacent to it. The look of someone who has just watched a thing get done in a way they wouldn't have done it themselves, but can nonetheless respect. She walked away without another word. Elena waited another moment. Then she walked back to the service corridor door, knocked twice, and pushed it open. Logan was there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his jacket on, and the particular stillness of a man who has been in a lot of hallways waiting for things to resolve and knows how to wait without burning through himself in the process. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She thought about what the word meant, given everything. The last 18 hours, the drives on the table, the recording of Gerald Fenn's voice, Arthur Vance's eyes, as he chose survival over solidarity. "Something like okay," she said. He nodded. That was enough for him, apparently. He pushed off from the wall and moved toward the freight elevator without making her explain it further, and she was grateful, in a way she couldn't have articulated cleanly, for a person who understood that some things didn't need to be said to be real. The elevator came. They got in. The doors closed on the 32nd floor, on the conference suite, and the board members and the wreckage of a plan that had taken 4 years to build and about 4 minutes to start collapsing. And Elena stood in the small metal box heading downward and let herself feel, just briefly, the full weight of everything she'd carried through the night and the morning and into this room. Her hands had stopped shaking. The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened to the service corridor and the clean, ordinary concrete smell of a building's least glamorous exit. They walked out into the afternoon light. The afternoon they walked out of the building, neither of them talked much. Dell picked them up 2 blocks from the tower in the rental car, and they drove north through the city in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable but had a lot of weight to it, the kind of quiet that settles after something large has ended and the body hasn't caught up to the fact yet. Elena sat in the back seat and watched the buildings thin out and give way to neighborhoods, and then to the edges of things, where the city lost confidence in itself and became something looser and less certain. She fell asleep somewhere around mile 15. She didn't mean to. One moment she was watching a strip mall go past the window, and the next moment Logan was saying her name quietly from the front seat, and they were parked outside Mrs. Calloway's farmhouse, and the light had changed. "Nora," she said, not entirely awake. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be a few minutes." She sat up and watched him walk to the door. The same walk she'd been watching for 24 hours now, that unhurried, deliberate movement that looked like a man who had decided somewhere along the way to stop rushing toward things and just go at his own pace and arrive when he arrived. The door opened before he knocked. Nora came out at a run, arms out, the stuffed rabbit trailing from one hand, and Logan caught her and lifted her in one motion that looked easy, even though she was clearly not a small 7-year-old, and stood there in the late afternoon light with his daughter's arms around his neck. Elena looked away. It felt like something she wasn't supposed to see, not because it was private, but because it was too complete. A thing that existed entirely without her, without any of what had happened in the last day. A piece of a life that had been going on long before she came through his door, and would go on long after. She thought about that on the drive back to the station, about how much of other people's lives you never see, and how easy it is to forget that the person standing across from you is carrying an entire world you know nothing about. The station looked the same. It always would, probably. It had the particular permanence of things that have been weathered long enough to stop changing. The red stripe on the fascia, the old pump islands, the hand-lettered sign. Mercer's service, almost washed out. Logan parked under the corrugated overhang, and Nora jumped out before the engine stopped and went directly to a cat that Elena hadn't known existed. A large orange one that appeared from behind the pump island and submitted to being picked up with the resignation of an animal that had made its peace with this particular child. "That's Gerald," Logan said. Elena looked at the cat. "Gerald." Nora named him. I've given up trying to understand her logic. Elena almost smiled. It felt like using a muscle she hadn't used in a while. "She seems like a good kid." "She's a handful." He said it with a particular quality. Not complaint, not exactly pride, something in between that was more honest than either. "She's also the best person I know," which is probably not something you're supposed to say about your own kid. I think you're allowed, Elena said. He looked at her briefly, then away. They stood for a moment in the early evening with the mountains behind the station going purple at the ridgeline and the cat making a deeply irritated sound in Nora's arms, and the whole thing feeling, to Elena, almost unbearably ordinary in a way that she hadn't known she was hungry for until right now. The weeks that followed were not clean. She had known they wouldn't be, but knowing a thing and living it are different educations. The independent investigation launched on the same day as the board recess and moved faster than Elena expected, which she later understood was because the SEC had been building a parallel inquiry for 6 months, triggered, it turned out, by an anonymous tip filed the previous spring. She never found out definitively who filed it. She had her suspicions. She hoped she was right about them. Gerald Fenn retained counsel within 4 hours of the board meeting. Warren Tate retained counsel within 6. Richard Hale was placed on administrative suspension pending investigation and did not speak publicly about any of it, which was probably the most sensible decision he made in the entire episode. The Kellner, Marsh, and Holt law firm retained its own separate representation, which was the legal equivalent of a building trying to sue its own foundation, and went about as well. Arthur Vance resigned from the board within 72 hours. His letter was 3 paragraphs long and cited personal reasons and a desire to allow the company to move forward without distraction. He did not admit to anything. He never would. She understood that about him now with a clarity she couldn't have had before. He was a man who had spent 60 years constructing a version of himself that he believed completely, and no evidence, no investigation, no amount of other people's ruined lives was going to crack that construction open. The investigators would find what they would find. Whatever consequences followed would be processed by his attorneys as unfortunate misunderstandings. She had stopped expecting more than that from him. The expectation itself had been the problem, maybe. The idea that someone who operated the way he operated would eventually reach a moment of genuine reckoning, would look at what he'd built and see it clearly. Some people didn't. Some people were the last to know what they were, and the last to care. Marcus Reed was found 3 weeks after the board meeting. He was alive. That was the first thing she confirmed before she had his location, before she had the details. She asked the investigator who called her at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, "Is he alive?" And the investigator said yes, and she sat down on the floor of her kitchen and stayed there for a moment. He'd been in a rented cabin 4 hours north, off the grid deliberately, after receiving a threat specific enough that he'd made the calculation that disappearing was safer than staying visible. He'd left the case at the station because he'd known the station, known Logan's grandfather, known it was the kind of place that kept its secrets and didn't attract attention. He'd spent 6 weeks in a one-room cabin with a wood stove and a 6-month supply of canned goods and a shortwave radio he listened to for news, waiting to find out whether the thing he'd started had ended one way or the other. When Elena spoke to him on the phone, the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry I couldn't finish it myself." "You did finish it," she told him. "I just carried the last part." He was quiet for a moment. "How's the company?" "Alive," she said. "It's going to take a while, but it's alive." "Good." A pause. "I liked that company. Before all of this." "So did I." She had him come in for a full debrief with the investigators the following week, and she met him in the lobby personally, which she hadn't planned to do but found herself doing anyway. He was thinner than she remembered, with the particular worn-down look of someone who had been scared for a long time and was only now beginning to let that go. He shook her hand and then, unexpectedly, she pulled him into a brief, awkward hug that neither of them was entirely prepared for and both of them needed. "You could have come to me sooner," she said when they pulled apart. "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't sure you weren't part of it." That landed where it was supposed to land. She didn't argue with it. "That's fair," she said. "It wasn't," he said. "But I wasn't thinking fairly by that point. I was just trying to survive." She understood that completely. The 3 LLCs were dissolved by court order in the second month of the investigation. The construction contracts that had been redirected through them were voided, and the company that had received the preliminary site preparation contract repaid the advance under a settlement negotiated with an efficiency that suggested they'd been expecting the call. The Meridian project itself was more complicated. Elena spent 6 weeks in a series of meetings that she later described to no one as some of the most difficult of her professional life. Not because the conversations were hostile, but because she had to make a decision that cost more than anything the fraud scheme had taken from her. She stopped the project, not permanently. The corridor was real, the need was real, and there were 300 people whose jobs depended on Meridian moving forward. But the financing structure had been so thoroughly compromised, the contractor relationship so entangled with the shell companies, the environmental filings so corrupted at the base, that trying to build on the existing foundation was like trying to construct a house on cracked concrete. You could do it. It would look fine for a while, and then one day the whole thing would shift. She shut it down and started over. 18 months of planning, deconstructed and rebuilt from the permit level upward. New contractor selection, open bidding, a transparency process that was more time-consuming than anything she'd implemented before. And also, she thought, more likely to produce a project she could actually stand behind. It cost her the quarter. It cost the company $12 million in sunk costs that couldn't be recovered. The financial press was not kind about it, and she read 3 separate op-eds that described the decision as an overcorrection, as excessive caution, as the kind of self-protective gesture that prioritized optics over shareholder value. She printed one of them and put it in a drawer in her desk. Not because she agreed with it, because she wanted to remember what it felt like to do the right thing and have people tell her it was the wrong thing, and to do it anyway. The Mercer property situation resolved more cleanly, if slowly. The State Environmental Office completed its review in 6 weeks and voided the violation filings. The legal action seeking to compel a property transfer was dismissed. The forged documents bearing Logan's grandfather's signature were formally declared fraudulent and removed from the county record, which required a specific legal process that Elena's attorneys handled and which she paid for without being asked, because it was the least she could do and she knew it. She called Logan to tell him when it was finalized. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which she'd noticed was always how he answered. Not immediately, not after a long pause, just on the 3rd ring, as if he'd decided that was the right amount of time. "The property record is cleared," she said. "Officially, as of this morning." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. I didn't do very much. My attorneys did it." "You paid for it." "Logan." "Elena." She almost laughed. It came out right this time. "Are you going to let me thank you properly, or are you going to keep deflecting?" "Probably keep deflecting," he said. "It's faster." "I'd like to come see the station," she said, "when the work is done. If that would be all right." Another pause. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be all right." The work took 4 months. She knew this because Dell, who had developed an unexpected interest in the project that he explained to no one, sent her periodic updates that were mostly photographs and occasional 2-sentence progress reports written in the same compressed, affect-free style as everything else he produced. Structural work on back office complete. Plumbing functional. And then 2 weeks later, Nora picked the paint color. It's very yellow. She drove up on a Saturday in early spring, alone, no security team. She'd kept a smaller detail than before and had made peace with the fact that the detail was probably necessary, but today she didn't want it. Today she wanted to arrive the same way she'd arrived the first time, without announcement, without the apparatus of who she was supposed to be. The station was recognizable and wasn't. The bones were the same. The pump islands, the low building, the corrugated overhang. But the concrete had been patched and sealed, the windows replaced, the fascia repainted. The stripe across the front was red again, properly red, the color it must have been when Logan's grandfather first put it there. The sign above the door had been redone in the same hand-lettered style, but fresh. Mercer's Service and Supply. Below it, on a smaller sign, in what appeared to be a child's handwriting transferred to wood. Coffee, repairs, emergency radio. There were 2 vehicles parked out front, not broken-down-looking vehicles, just parked. A truck she didn't recognize, and a sedan with out-of-state plates. She sat in her car for a moment looking at it. When she went inside, the front room was different. The cracked glass counter was gone, replaced by a solid wooden one, sanded and sealed. The old faded county map was still on the wall, but had been joined by a newer one and a hand-drawn diagram of the surrounding roads that appeared to be extremely accurate. There was a coffee setup on the counter, a real machine, not held together with electrical tape, though not fancy either, the kind of thing you'd find in a firehouse or a mechanic's waiting room. There were 3 mismatched chairs along one wall and a small table, a shelf with a first aid kit, a weather radio, a printed list of emergency contacts for the county. A man she didn't know was sitting in one of the chairs with a cup of coffee, looking at his phone. He glanced up when she came in, nodded, looked back down. Nobody who didn't belong. Just somebody who'd stopped. Dell's 2-sentence update from 2 months ago made sense now. Not just a repair shop, something else. Logan came through from the workshop. He had grease on his right hand and was wiping it off with a cloth that didn't entirely work. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. That quick, complete assessment that had stopped feeling clinical somewhere along the way and now just felt like being seen. "You found it," he said. "The sign is hard to miss now," she said. "It's very red." Nora picked the shade. She was very specific about it. "Where is she?" "School. She'll be furious she missed you." He came around the counter and poured her a cup of coffee from the machine, set it on the counter. "Come look at the back." Well, the workshop had been reorganized but not gutted. The hydraulic lift was still there, the pegboards, the workbench, with its precise tool arrangement. But the back room that had been the storage office was now something else. A small space with a desk, a computer, a radio setup that Dell had clearly had a hand in, and a window that looked out at the back acre and the tree line and the mountains behind it. "Emergency Communications Center," Logan said. "Dell came up for a week in January. He wouldn't take anything for it." "He wouldn't?" "He said it was a project." A slight pause. "He also said this area has a significant gap in volunteer emergency communication coverage, which I looked up and is actually true. So now we're registered with the county. If there's a weather event, road emergency, anything like that, travelers can come here and we can reach people." Elena looked at the setup, at the window and the mountains. "Your grandfather would have liked this." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think he would have." She turned around and looked at him. In the daylight, in his own space, he looked different from the way he'd looked in the workshop at 2 a.m. with flashlights sweeping the windows. Or maybe not different exactly, but more complete. More like the person he'd decided to be once he'd made a decision. "I owe you something I don't know how to pay back," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "Logan." "Elena." A beat. "You came through a door. I made a choice. Those are 2 separate things." "You made a lot of choices after that." "So did you." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're still standing. That was the choice you had to make." She thought about the boardroom, about Vance's face, about the recording of Gerald Fenn's voice filling a room where everyone could hear it, and the silence that came after. "I stopped the Meridian project," she said. "The financial press hasn't been kind about it." "I know. Dell sent me the op-eds." "Of course he did." She looked at her coffee cup. "I'm rebuilding it from the ground up. It'll take 2 more years, minimum. A lot of people are unhappy with me." "Are you unhappy with you?" She considered the question seriously. "No," she said. "That's the strange part. No." He nodded. Something settled in his expression that she'd been watching approach since January, a kind of ease that hadn't been there in the first hours, when he'd been operating on old reflexes in an emergency situation. This was something slower and more considered. "What happens to the company?" he asked. "New CFO starts Monday. New board composition. Carolyn Vreeland is chair, which I think is going to be interesting in ways I can't fully predict yet. Patricia Osei is back as general counsel." She paused. "We're smaller than we were, more careful than we were. I don't know if that's the right combination for the market we're operating in, but it's what I can stand behind." That seems like enough. It doesn't feel like enough. Most right things don't. He said it simply, without philosophy attached to it, just as a fact he'd arrived at through experience. They feel like the minimum. Like you did what you were supposed to do, and you don't get credit for that. You just get to live with it. She looked at him across the small room. "Is that what you found out here? Living with things?" He thought about it. Not a performance of thinking, just actual consideration. I found out that taking care of a small thing well is worth more than I used to think, he said. A car that runs, a kid who eats breakfast, a place where somebody lost in the mountains can stop and get warm. He looked at the window, at the mountains. I spent a long time thinking that was settling. Turns out it's just what it is. It doesn't have a name better than that. The man in the front room called out, not alarmed, just conversational, asking if there was more coffee. Logan called back that there was, help yourself, and the ordinary sound of it, the absolute mundane normalcy of it, did something to the inside of Elena's chest that she didn't have a clean word for. She thought about what she'd been a year ago. The CEO, whose name was on the building in the lobby, whose security detail knew her schedule better than she did, who had a car service and a corporate apartment and a life so thoroughly arranged that there was almost no friction in it anywhere. She had believed, she realized now, she had genuinely believed, that the absence of friction meant things were working, that the smooth operation of all the visible parts meant the invisible parts were fine. She had been wrong about that in the most expensive possible way. She wasn't sure she would have learned it any other way. She didn't know if that made it worth what it had cost. She thought about Marcus Reed in his cabin with his shortwave radio, 6 weeks of canned goods, listening for news. She thought about Logan's daughter naming a cat Gerald with complete confidence in the logic of it. She thought about the stick figure drawing above the register, me and Daddy, and the fact that Logan had put it back up in exactly the same spot after the repainting, slightly crooked, held with the same 2 pieces of tape. Some things, she thought, you hold on to not because they're perfect, but because they're true. Gerald Fenn entered a plea agreement in the 7th month of the investigation. Warren Tate reached a separate settlement the following month that involved significant financial penalties and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. Richard Hale resigned under pressure and faced a separate civil action from the families affected by the fraudulent land filings, the people who'd lost property, who'd been threatened, who'd spent money fighting legal actions built on forged documents. That piece mattered to Elena more than she had expected it to. It was easy, in the momentum of corporate legal proceedings, to lose track of the fact that the fraud hadn't only happened to her. There were people outside the boardroom who'd had their names attached to violations they hadn't committed, their land threatened by actions rooted in paperwork that had never been real. She made sure, through the company's legal team, that the settlement process reached those people, that they received compensation, that the records were cleared, that someone from Whitmore Solutions appeared in person at county offices to formally correct the documentation. It was a small gesture in the context of everything else. She knew that. She did it anyway, because she had been learning, slowly and with difficulty, the difference between justice and resolution. And because the people who'd been caught in the edges of this thing hadn't chosen to be there, hadn't had the drives and the recordings, and Dell's air-gapped laptop and a former Navy SEAL who knew how to read a building in the dark. They'd just had their doors knocked on by people with lawyers, and that wasn't nothing, and she wasn't going to let it be nothing. Arthur Vance was never charged. She had known it was possible. The investigators found the threads she'd described, the law firm, the registered agents, the careful distance he'd maintained from every operational decision, but distance, carefully maintained over years by good attorneys, has a way of becoming legal insulation. There was not enough to charge him with. There was enough to make his name unpleasant in certain circles, enough that 2 of the organizations he sat on the boards of quietly asked for his resignation, enough that the speech he'd given at her first investor meeting, the one about integrity, the one she'd stood off to the side and listened to and felt confirmed by, was, she understood now, the most complete portrait of him available. A man who spoke beautifully about things he didn't practice, so well and for so long that he may have stopped being able to tell the difference. She stopped thinking about him. That was the decision she made, at some specific moment she couldn't later identify. She just realized one day that she'd gone several days without thinking about Arthur Vance, and that this was fine, and that she was going to let it stay that way. On the afternoon she visited the station, she stayed for 3 hours. She didn't plan to. She had a dinner back in the city and a call with the new CFO that she'd scheduled for Sunday evening, and she had her calendar in her head the way she always did. But Logan made another cup of coffee and showed her what he was working on. A truck transmission, old and complicated, the kind of repair that nobody did anymore because it was cheaper to replace than to fix. And he explained it in the direct, unadorned way he explained everything. And she found herself asking questions she actually wanted to know the answers to. Not because she needed to know how a transmission worked, because the way he talked about it was the way he talked about everything that mattered to him, with patience and without performance, like the thing itself was interesting enough and didn't need to be dressed up. Nora came home on the school bus at 4:15. She came through the front door with her backpack sliding off one shoulder and stopped when she saw Elena, assessed her with the same quick evaluation Logan used. She was absolutely his daughter in that particular way. And then said, "You came back." "I did," Elena said. "Dad said you might." She looked at Logan. He was looking at the transmission. "Come see the back room," Nora said. "I set up the radio. Dell showed me how." She spent 45 minutes in the back room while Nora demonstrated the radio setup with a thoroughness that suggested she had been practicing the demonstration, probably in a mirror. Logan appeared in the doorway at some point and leaned against the frame and listened with the expression of a man watching something he is proud of without wanting to make it a big deal. When Elena finally said she had to go, and she did, the city was 90 minutes away and the dinner wasn't optional. Nora shook her hand with great formality and said, "You should come back when the cafe part is open. We're going to have pie." "What kind?" "I haven't decided yet." She was very serious about this. "I'm still doing research." Logan walked Elena to her car. The evening was coming on. The mountains behind the station going from purple to dark blue, the air cold and clean. A car slowed on the main road as it passed the station, and Elena watched it, and it kept going. She turned to Logan. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the last of the light was behind him, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had made a life in a hard place and learned to find it sufficient, who had made one specific choice on a stormy night to pull a stranger into the shadows and say, "Stay quiet," and who had not made much of that choice afterward, had not needed to. "That night," she said, "when you said you saw someone alone in the rain who needed help, did you know it was going to be all of this?" "No," he said. "I thought you were a lost driver." "And if you'd known?" He thought about it seriously, the way he always did. "Probably the same," he said. "You still needed help." She nodded. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that the calculus of that, the decision made in under 2 seconds, in the dark, with flashlights coming up the road, was the thing she had thought about more than anything else in the months since. Not the boardroom, not the recordings, not even Marcus Reed's 11-word message. This, the door opening and someone deciding, without information, without certainty, without anything except the basic available fact of a person who needed help, to be the person who helped. She thought about how many versions of that decision got made every day by people nobody would ever write about. The small, unwitnessed choices. The ones that didn't have a recording and a board meeting and a redemption arc at the end. Just a person, a moment, a door. "Thank you," she said, and meant it as completely as she'd ever meant anything. Logan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Drive safe. The curve at mile 47 is worse when it's dry. People take it too fast." She got in her car. He stood in the lot until she turned onto the main road, and she saw him in the rear-view mirror, not waving, just standing there. And then the curve came and she was through it and the station was gone. She drove south toward the city in the dark, the mountains receding behind her, the lights of the valley coming up ahead. She had a dinner and a phone call and a Monday morning and a company she was rebuilding piece by piece on a foundation she'd had to strip down to the concrete to make honest. She had 2 more years of Meridian before the first shovel legally broke ground, and a board chair who asked questions at a rate that would have exhausted her a year ago and now just seemed correct. She had Marcus Reed, who had come back to work 3 weeks ago and had, on his first day, reorganized the entire internal filing system with a thoroughness that bordered on the punitive. She had, she thought, a life that was harder and smaller and more carefully considered than the one she'd had before the storm, and she was not sure she would trade it. That wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a tidy conclusion. She had made serious mistakes that she could not fully repair, had trusted badly and not seen clearly, had built something that other people had found a way to hollow out from the inside while she stood in the lobby taking credit for the facade. Those were not things you forgave yourself for cleanly. They were things you carried, and you tried to let them change how you moved through the room, and you hoped the change was enough. But she was moving through the room. That was the part she hadn't been sure of, on the logging road in the dark, with the drives in her hand and 4 hours of daylight left before the meeting. She was still moving through the room. The highway opened up ahead of her, straight and wide and lit, and she drove, and the mountains held their positions behind her, and the station sat where it had always sat at mile 40. A small lit place in the dark, the red stripe visible from the road, a yellow light on in the back room where a 7-year-old was doing radio research, and a man who'd walked away from war was putting a transmission back together with the patience of someone who believed that broken things, given enough time and the right hands, could be made to run again. It wasn't a grand truth. It wasn't the kind of thing that made good copy or an inspiring quarterly statement, but it was the kind of thing that was true every day, quietly, whether or not anyone was watching. And Elena Whitmore, 30 years old and educated by a storm, finally understood that this was exactly where the weight of the world had always actually rested. Not in the boardrooms, not in the towers, not in the hands of the people whose names were on the buildings. In the small choices. In the people no one noticed. In the doors that open when they should have stayed shut. And the hands that reached down into the dark without being asked. She kept driving. The night held.